I thought that was very endearing when I met Drew and he had no shoes on. It reminded me of home. I'm from Australia, as you can probably hear. Kai kind of reminded me of home for a little bit. It was kind of strange. I make images, so it's very different from what a lot of you guys are doing. I had to kind of rework this talk a little bit. I usually talk more to kind of designers and artists, so I wanted to kind of rework it more towards people who are actually building products and things like that. And it was interesting, like thinking about what I do and how that might relate to what you guys do. So hopefully there's something of value in here. So kind of here's what I do. I kind of build these dramatic, kind of heroic images, mostly for big brands, but also for small ones. Here's some of them. This is actually my wife. She's over there. And the reason I show this one first is because we made this in our living room in our small apartment in San Diego. And it kind of reminds me of, I don't know, where I started. That's a background that we shot in Borneo, or I shot in Borneo years before. And it kind of representative of a lot of my work. It's very different from what we're doing right now, you'll see. But I like to look at this image because it does remind me of making things, executing, and doing things with relatively, a small amount of resources. We went to REI, we dressed my wife up, we shot her in the living room, and we made a picture. So here's some of the other stuff we do, kind of sports imagery for brands. Very like heroic, dramatic kind of imagery. When people ask me what I do, I always find it really tough to kind of describe it. Use a lot of lighting and texture and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to kind of show you some pictures so you know who I am, because most of you probably don't, and what I do. This one's for National Geographic Channel, one of their, they created a TV show about chasing UFOs. It's kind of ridiculous. Nat Geo has become reality TV. It used to teach me about how lions catch the zebras, but it's a little bit different now. So this is actually an image we did for Diageo, the liquor brand, and that's actually on wine bottles. If you go to Vons, you might see this guy. It's actually a friend of mine. He's an art director. This is an image we just recently created for Wrangler Workwear. It's clipped a little bit, and I'm going to go and talk a little bit more about this one. A lot of the stuff I'll show you is not actually on my website. That's about to relaunch, so hopefully I can show you something new. And here's some of the brands that we're working with now, I'm working with now. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a backstory. I think it's somewhat interesting, at least for about 5 minutes, otherwise you'll get bored, of where kind of I came from. I think it's always interesting to hear where artists start, because we don't just pop out of the womb and start creating amazing images that then you see on Tumblr. It's kind of this evolutionary process. The work starts somewhere and then it ends up in another place. And so that's kind of one of the themes of my talk, kind of finding yourself, putting that into your work, and then creating something that's your own, which I think is really important. So obviously I started in Australia. I started as a biologist originally. I was very intent on catching lizards and snakes as a kid, and I thought maybe I'll make that into a job. And so I did that for a while, and we traveled all around, and that was the kind of the start of getting interested in photography. I would make images of these reptiles that we would capture on fauna surveys in the desert, and I really enjoyed kind of taking these photos and then showing people who weren't interested in this topic, these beautiful creatures, what I thought were beautiful creatures. So I kind of started here. I was a biologist, and I would, make these images of reptiles. How that relates to what you guys do, I don't know, but maybe that's somewhat interesting. And so I wanted to show these images because these are kind of the formative years of kind of me experimenting with different imagery styles, maybe in the same way that you as designers might try lots of different styles and then arrive at your own kind of place. So I wanted to show these. This is in Borneo. I did some travel photography for magazines starting out. And you can see this is very different from where I am now, but maybe there's some common threads throughout it all. So that's kind of a little bit of that. I stayed with these Muay Thai fighters in Thailand for about 2 weeks and photographed them kind of through their daily routine. And a big part of this process was just being curious. Photography for me is a really great way to relate to the world. I'm stuck behind the computer a lot of time because I do a lot of Photoshop work, but it's so nice to be able to get out into the real world, find something I'm interested in, and then create images about that topic. So this is a little 13-year-old boy who had these amazing tattoos on his back, and he would fight every weekend for about $25 in a ring, with all these foreigners watching him. This is more recently, we went with Invisible Children to Uganda, and that was just another exercise in, trying to create some images that are a bit more personal to me, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about personal work and why that's important. I think the commonality between all these things is, these are kind of some of my takeaways as I was making this talk. I think when I make talks or when I tweet things occasionally, often it's just to myself, just to remind me of these things, because so often we're scrolling and looking at other people's stuff and just being distracted in general. It's these moments when we create a talk or we're trying to tell someone what we do or create an elevator pitch that kind of coalesces all these thoughts going through your head. So I'm kind of talking to myself throughout this, so I hope you don't mind. So going places, traveling, I know a lot of the other speakers have talked about that. That's really important, I feel, in kind of just experimenting, trying different ways of working, trying different ways of being, and arriving at something that's your own. So that was a big part of getting to where I am now, is going out, trying different styles of photography in the same way that you would do that in design or maybe in development, and then arriving at something kind of through blood, sweat, and tears. This is somewhat interesting to people, I suppose, how we make these images. Often people ask, can I just press a filter button? And I kind of joke, you just press Photoshop and it kind of looks like that. But it's kind of a somewhat complicated process. So I wanted to kind of go through that if you'll have me. So I work in teams, and it's funny talking about this because I know a lot of you guys work in teams. Most of the time I'm on my own, jamming away in Photoshop, listening to SoundCloud, but in other times we have these very concerted moments of energy that will happen, in 1 or 2 days, where we'll make the assets that will go into building these final images. And then I'm working with a producer who kind of puts this together, keeps us all organized, casting to find the characters that we're shooting, stylists to dress them, makeup artists and hairstylists, assistants, and sometimes with video crews. Oh, I don't have any sound, do I? Uh-oh, here's a video. Drew, how do I get sound through here? No? It's just a silly little techno song. It's not that important. We can just sing along or something. Yes. There you go. So this is just showing the kind of the process. That makes it sound way sexier than it really is. It's like a music video of myself. But yeah, you can kind of see there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of people on set, and it's this very intense day of kind of 2 weeks of kind of management and production, culminating in this one day of creating stuff. So this is one of what we're making. Oftentimes I work on blue screen because we're cutting stuff out, but it just depends on the project. And so we're going through hundreds of selects, creating these characters, and that's kind of just the first part. A lot of photographers, this is kind of where it ends, and they can make images all in camera and that kind of thing, and we do that as well. But I guess the style that I'm known for is more these composites. So it's a little bit of a different process. A lot of it happens in post-production. So that's kind of the final image where we arrived, and that's for wrangle it. We were trying to empower the working class man. The copy was something like "Let there be work," and it was cool because we got to tell a story about, you know, guys who are building everything around us. You know, they're building things with iron as opposed to me pushing around some pixels. So it was kind of cool to you know, make that heroic. So Photoshop's really important, as I mentioned. Couldn't do what I do without it. I wanted to kind of go through here some kind of case studies. This is from National Geographic Channel. You can kind of see how we're blending images together. Here we went to the Navajo Indian Reservation. This was for a personal project, and met this 89-year-old Navajo woman, which was really special, and got the opportunity to photograph her. It was amazing thinking, you know, she had grown up around horses and carriages, and a very different, to me, kind of tweeting as I did this. It was interesting. Here's one of the series we did for Star Trek. We shot this in the backyard of this Navy SEAL. You can't really see it here. You can see a little bit where the tires are above, and we kind of plated that together from images all over the place. So it allows a lot of flexibility to create things. You know, art directors can come up with things in their mind, and we can kind of make it happen by bringing pieces together from all over the place. Kind of same thing here, lots of images going together. And so I'm always building a library of skies and grass and all sorts of strange things like that. Here's another one we did in the living room. I should call this the living room series. We did this in our tiny apartment. This is a friend of ours. He wanted a portrait. This was a few years ago. And rather than just doing a headshot, we decided to make something a bit more interesting. So we shot these knives at different angles and then kind of plated it all together in post. And there's another image we did for another brand. And half the reason I do this is I think because I'm so attention deficit, I would get bored doing images otherwise. So I like to try to make it a little bit more complicated and, you know, as interesting as I can. I'm trying to build a bit of story into some of these, because the still image can be a challenge to kind of relay that much emotion. Here's some of that series that was on the wine labels. And style's a really interesting concept that I always think about. I guess some people might regard that I have a certain style in photography, and I think it's hearing people talk here over the last few days and other conferences, you can kind of gather that people have a certain style, and sometimes that's a reason for their success commercially, especially when they're freelance. Like Tav, who talked yesterday, I really think he has a really well-established style, but often, you know, when you're the artist, you don't really realize that. For me, in photography, style is based on what you shoot and then how you do it. So technique versus subject matter. How that relates to what you guys do, hopefully we can try and draw some strings there, but I think a lot of us obsess over technique and how we make things look, and, you know, we look at tutorials all day and we look at all other amazing, we kind of obsess over design porn and photography porn and all that kind of stuff all day long. Well, I know I do, maybe it's just me. And I think we get obsessed with technique so much. And I think something that I'm going to try and talk about a little bit here, and something I think about a lot, is more, you know, the subject and the stories you're trying to tell and the concepts. I think that's a really important thing to think about. So this is kind of talking to myself. Stop scrolling. I think I was going to talk a little bit about inspiration, but that's such a hard thing to kind of define. So I thought, you know, what is something that helps me make work, and what is something that I think ends up being inspiring is just getting off the internet, getting off social networks and stuff like that. I find it really hard to do that. But going out there and making things is really a big deal. And I know all of you are doing that. You know, Drew's amazing at that. You know, execute, you guys make things in like 4 minutes, and, you know, suddenly you have a company, which is pretty amazing to me. Like, and you guys are building things far beyond, you know, even just the images that I'm making. So it's really inspiring to see. But I think it's something we all need to remind ourselves about. Dan and I were talking about this yesterday. One of the biggest things that separates people is there's relatively few people that are actually building stuff. There are a lot of people retweeting it. There are a lot of people tumbling it. There are a lot of people spreading stuff out or talking about the ideas that they want to execute. But there are relatively few people actually out there creating things. And as soon as you're doing that, you're in a much smaller, you're in like, you know, the top 5%. And if you're out there just already, if you're making something, you're already, you know, quite far along in getting there, I think. So this is something I'm always trying to remind myself, to get out there and just make something. Talking to the photographers, this is like a topic that comes up a lot doing personal work. Kind of we're working for brands oftentimes, or we're working for other people. So it's really important for us to get out there and kind of execute our creativity. I think for designers as well, Tav kind of touched on that a little bit. We all just want to make something that we enjoy, something that adds to the world and not always something that's tethered to a brand. So for me, that's really important, getting out there and creating personal work. Kind of touched on it a bit before with the travel stuff. Here's a series we did Comic-Con last year. These are a group of people who call themselves the real-life superheroes. And each of them has a strange superhero name. As you can see, the guy in the middle, his name's We the People. He came up with that all on his own. And he patrols his relevant town. I need to actually add the names of the towns and the names of the people here, but there are people from all over America that kind of converge on Comic-Con. And these aren't just guys that like have a favorite superhero, they are a superhero in their own mind. So they go out and fight crime. There's actually a great HBO series, I forget what it's called, maybe Real Life Superheroes, about this phenomena. So this is an interesting subculture. And the reason I wanted to photograph them is I'm not really so into superheroes, but I do love the human condition, and I love subcultures, and I love what makes people tick. And I thought this was just something so interesting that I had to draw some attention to it. Here's some more here. Look at that incredible woman on the right. She would definitely crush you or I. Her name was Miss Fit, apparently. A little bit overfit, but you know. And then there was a little boy in the middle, and he had this little chocolate stain on his shirt, which I thought was really funny. He took himself very seriously, as you can see, and it was fun photographing these people. And the reason I show this is kind of something that wasn't attached to a brand. It was something we went out and decided to do. And I think, you know, it's the kind of stuff that people spread around on the internet and talk about. So if you're an artist, if you're a designer, I think that's always often the most interesting work to people, is stuff that you've gone out and done yourself, because that really reflects who you are. You know, you've art directed it, you've made those decisions. You can see the yawn starting, so I'll try and get to another video soon. Here's another kind of series of images we're just kind of finishing up now. This is a friend of mine in Venice on the right, and same guy on the left. He was going to cut his beard off, so we decided, no, I would like to make some images out of that. So we went and made him a Civil War kind of general, and then a Union and a Confederate soldier. I'm not American, but it was an interesting topic to me. So the point of showing these is to show you something, you know, go out there and make something. Sometimes it's prompted by other people around you kind of egging you on. And in this case, it was, you know, the deadline of this guy was going to he wanted to cut his beard off. He wasn't going to get a job. So we decided to make images out of it. There you go. So storytelling is super important to what I do. I think about that a lot, and I think that might be something that's interesting to you guys, because I think so often we get obsessed with what our product does or how it does it. We forget the overall message of the storytelling. You know, we told stories around campfires for the longest time. Then it became print and, you know, commercials, and now it's kind of social media. So I think telling the story of your brand, telling the story of these different, you know, subjects that I'm photographing, I think that's a really important thing to think about. Thinking of something larger than what the product does, I think is a really, you know, how does it change the lives of people? I think it's something, you know, interesting that came out of me exploring this. Stanley Kubrick is someone I really admire. He's got an exhibition at LACMA in LA right now, so I'd highly recommend it. I thought this was a great quote of his. If you really want to communicate something, even if it's just an emotion or an attitude, let alone an idea, the least effective and least enjoyable way is directly. It only goes in about an inch. But if you can get people to the point where they have to think a moment what it is you're getting at and then discover it, the thrill of discovery goes right through the heart. So this is one of the things I'm kind of thinking about at the moment. Part of it's, you know, having my own imagery become a little bit more subtle and a little bit more layered. And I thought, you know, it was really interesting, so I just wanted to add it in there. So maybe you guys will take some value from it. This is another book that's really influenced me. I kind of wanted to share this because I think it's beyond being a photographer. I think you would all benefit from this. Some of you may already have read it or seen Simon Sinek. I think he talked at TED or TEDx. Start with why, and it kind of relates to what I was talking about, you know, not thinking so much about how you do or what you do, but the why of what you do. What is the core? You know, Nike has a really strong core, just do it. It goes beyond being a sports person. Apple has had a great core. They're kind of losing it now to me, but they had a great core of thinking differently and doing things differently and rebelling against the big IBMs of the world. And those are brands that, I mean, they could sell you a lollipop and, you know, brand it with Nike and you would buy it. I mean, they have created these cults of ideas which I think are really, really powerful. So that's just a highly recommended thing that I've kind of trying to bring into my work. So yeah, a lot of people focus, they you know, their advertising relates to what? They're a car company, they want to tell you how many horsepower the car has, how many air conditioners it has, you know, it has 72 mpg or whatever. But in reality, what they should be talking about is the why. What does that brand embody at its core? So working in advertising and working with a lot of advertising people, I try and think a lot about this. Taste is something really important to me. I'm going to show a little video. A lot of you have probably seen it from Ira Glass, who says it really eloquently. And I'll kind of put that on really quickly because he says it better than I will.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, you know, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just like say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste, they could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. In my case, like I took longer to figure out how to do this than anybody I've ever met. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
So I thought that was great. Kai kind of touched a little bit on it. I really like his idea of idea monogamy. So frequently we become attached to things and then run through them and never actually fully, master them. Trying to do something for a long time allows you to be a lot better at that one thing. And I think, even when I was starting, I deleted my old Flickr account the other day because it was just full of old work that I didn't really want to look at. But it did allow me to see the huge leaps and bounds that I've made in my own work, even within the short space of the last 3 or 4 years. So I would encourage any of you that are in that point where you're looking at these Uber designers on the internet and these people who are amazing and you could never aspire to be as good at them at any one thing. Just remember they all went through that. They all had that period where they weren't that good. And sometimes it's great to not be that good because you don't have that much attention on you. So you have this opportunity with an anonymity to do work, put it out there, get feedback, put it on Dribble and you're not going to have 10,000 of your followers kind of making snarky comments. You have that opportunity, and I think grasping that, doing a shitload of work, and then coming out on the other side, there's no way you can't succeed. So that's so there's kind of the crux of what I've kind of been trying to say. Finding yourself, putting yourself into your work, then no one else will be able to copy you. Telling stories, refining your taste, and then go out there and make something. So thank you. Cool, dude. I don't know if there are any questions. Happy to answer them if there are.
Hi. So I was just kind of curious from like a photography equipment standpoint, if you have like mainstays or if every shoot is, a different set of lighting and you have an enormous amount of rigs for everything.
Yeah, like in the living room period, as I described, it was a lot less. And you can kind of get by with, there's a great website called Strobus, which I'm sure a lot of you who are photographers are familiar with. And that kind of is a great inspiration to when you're starting out. Get a couple of speed lights or very simple lights or even just one light and start with that and a camera. All the cameras are kind of equally good these days. I mean, the last 10% of quality is where you get when you start getting into medium format and expensive equipment. But to answer your question, the gear is always changing depending on what we do. In the big commercial shoots, we use like a medium format camera, and then we use ProPhoto for the most part, lighting. But yeah, it just depends on what we're doing. If it's a small shoot, we might change those lights. Light is light, so for the most part, you can get away with much cheaper gear and kind of fake your way to looking at making it look a lot more expensive. So I'd never let, photographers are so great at obsessing over gear, and I'm the same, like, waiting for that new little bit of equipment that's going to make me that much better. But in reality, it never happens. You can do what you can do with, almost with an iPhone these days. So I'd encourage you to just forget about the gear sometimes, because I get that question a lot. And I know that when I was, even still, I still think about that stuff, and you've got to kind of just get him back in his cage, that little question, because, yeah, hopefully that answers that. Any other questions?
Great talk, Dean. That was awesome. I was just curious, being a freelancer, do you have any tips and tricks on how to get freelance work from clients? I know it can be challenging sometimes. Just curious if you had any advice.
Yeah. So the guy who's speaking is the master of freelance work, but I think, yeah, Dan taught me a lot. I think the first things first is creating great work and putting it out there, and it kind of markets itself in the same way that, the purple cow, Seth Godin idea. Creating work is similar to creating a product. If it's good enough, people will talk about it and spread it around. But it doesn't always happen that way. And you can kind of be sitting there with a portfolio of what you think is great work and, getting 4 visits a day. And that certainly does happen. But I think, channels like Behance, in the case of designers, Dribbble, things like that is a great way to get your work seen. It was interesting listening to some of the app guys yesterday talking about, captive audiences. And if you put something on the Mac store versus the App Store, there's a captive audience that's coming to those sites all the time looking for stuff. So your market's already there. So throwing your stuff up, it should get seen. So I would say doing that, getting your work seen a lot, and then reaching out to the people who would hire you. Go talk to them, get face to face. I think that's a great opportunity. Networking all the time, talking to people. And networking has such a bad stigma attached to it. I think it's more just making friends and going out there and just chatting to everyone's like you. All these people who are probably going to hire you are oftentimes, they admire your work, or they're cool people in general, and they're other creatives. So don't be afraid of that. So that's probably what's got me where I am. Cool. Okay. Oh, another one.
Hey, great talk. I imagine you have millions of photos, and I guess I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about what you do about storage and backup and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, if whoever can solve that problem for me here, I will pay you a lot of money. That is like, the bane of my existence. What I do right now is I have 2 of these Pegasus RAID, R6 RAIDs that you've probably seen, that I use kind of as work drives, and then that's backed up elsewhere. But yeah, each job is about 100 to 200 gigs. So it's just mayhem. So yeah, getting up with a good way of file naming, I've kind of got down, and backing up's great, but it's an eternal problem that's really only going to get solved as hard drives get bigger and cheaper. But yeah, if you're a photographer, or even if you're a designer working with huge files, one of the biggest things you can do for your performance is getting yourself a RAID or a really fast SSD, using that as a work drive, having a different scratch drive, and then having another operating system drive. That's the geeky side of what I do, but drive performance is really important. So beyond just backing it all up, working with 20 gigabyte Photoshop files the analogy I was talking about with Dan was like, tweaking cars is the much cooler version of what I do, but I kind of tweak out the computer to get it running fast enough to deal with that. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks, Dean.
Cheers.